As 2018 comes to a close, it's time to take a look back at the year in gaming, and in this episode, we're looking at the disappointing trend of monetization in games. 2017 was undoubtedly the year of the loot box, but just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, 2018 said hold my beer and gave us the sequel no one asked for. Another year filled with RNG loot, microtransactions in $60 games, and more special editions than you can shake a stick at. Not to be outdone by last year's greatest hits like paying for haircuts in NBA Live, opening loot box in public lobbies in COD World War II, and progression systems so broken by monetization they had to be completely reworked from the ground up in games like Shadow of War and Battlefront 2, 2018 was just as disappointing, sacrificing good game design for the benefit of AAA publishers' bottom lines. In an effort to make more money, publishers and developers have done some really strange things this year, Battlefield 5 being a prime example of that. The game had perhaps the most staggered release schedule of all time, resulting in what was one of the most confusing go-to-market strategies imaginable, and it's all thanks to monetization. Origin Access Premier is EA's $100 a year Netflix-style subscription service that allowed PC gamers first access to play on November 9th. It turns out that they already own 17% of the game subscription service market with that offering. Origin Access on PC and EA Access on Xbox for $5 a month or $20 a year allowed players access next, but with a 10-hour limited trial available on November 15th. Or if you pre-ordered the deluxe edition of the game, which goes for $80, that was also up and running on November 15th. If you just wanted to pay $60 to play the game like in the good old days, the release date for you was November 20th. The unfortunate thing about all of this is that ploys like this are making money for EA. If we look at the last 3 months of 2017 alone, EA's total revenue during that period was just over $1.2 billion. A staggering $787 million of that comes from in-game purchases and quote-unquote live services. Only $260 million came from actual game sales. That equates to 3 times as much money being spent in games than on the games themselves. Publishers are looking to take advantage of gamers in every conceivable way they can. Special editions, season passes, microtransactions, fast food promotions, DLC. These companies would have you believe that they're barely getting by because the cost of making games is going up, but they're making more profit than ever, and some, like EA, are doing that by spending less making their games, not more. When it comes to making games, EA on average needs to spend 40 cents to make back $1. But when it comes to in-game purchases like FIFA Ultimate Team, they only need to spend 20 cents to make the same dollar. This has resulted in a complete shift in priority over the last few years. You might guess that EA's development cost goes up year after year, but you would be incorrect. EA's development spending as of 2017 has gone down consistently since 2009. Adjusting for inflation, EA spent $300 million less in 2017 than they did in 2009 on games development. Andrew Wilson took over as CEO of EA in 2013, and since the way that EA makes money off in-game purchases has shifted dramatically. Prior to Wilson taking over as CEO, in 2012 EA made $3.4 billion via sales of games and $728 million via microtransactions and season passes. In 2017, just $2.6 billion of revenue was tied to game sales, with $2.2 billion coming in from microtransactions. And as previously mentioned, that shifted even more in the favor of profit from in-game purchases in the final quarter of 2017. Again, adjusting for inflation, EA made 30% less from the sale of games in 2017 than they did in 2012, but 280% more on the sale of microtransactions. This shift raised profits from $76 million in 2012 to $976 million in 2017. That's a $900 million increase in profits in just 5 years. As detrimental as it may be to the quality of games, it's impossible for a giant like EA to ignore. I don't think there's a better example of EA's greed than this exchange surrounding the now closed Visceral Studios single-player Star Wars project that was cancelled. Amy Hennig, who had previously led the Uncharted series, was leading the Star Wars project for Visceral. When she presented the game to EA executives, they asked in response, quote, "FIFA Ultimate Team makes $1 billion a year. Where's your version of that?" If that's your primary concern when presented with a Star Wars project developed by a more than capable studio, Led by someone like Amy Hennig, it's clear that the motivation is not about creating a great game, it's about making money. EA, like many other AAA publishers, would have you believe they're struggling and need monetization schemes to survive. Yet, they have the resources to wage war with governments to fight for the right to keep loot box gambling mechanics in games marketed to children. But let's put gambling aside for a moment and talk about a few other publishers. Ubisoft, just like EA, makes more money from microtransactions than the sale of actual games. And Activision Blizzard are in a similar boat, with over half of the more than $7 billion they brought in during 2017 coming from microtransactions. But as much money as they make, and regardless of how they make it, it's never enough for shareholders, which is ultimately who the publishers have to answer to. Despite Call of Duty Black Ops 4 setting a launch day record for units sold, the company saw their stock drop. A game from a AAA dev that makes record amounts of money isn't deemed successful because it didn't make all of the money. But don't worry, investors, microtransactions are back in COD, so profits should be up in no time. Of course, another entry from Activision Blizzard worth mentioning is Destiny 2, another game in 2018 expected to make all of the money, which is falling short of the company's expectations. Looking at worldwide game sales this year, Destiny 2 on PS4 doesn't even crack the top 50, coming in at number 59, and the Xbox version barely makes the top 100, coming in at 96. Compare that to 2014, when the first Destiny was number 6 worldwide with the PlayStation 4 version, and number 23 worldwide on Xbox One. During a recent investor meeting, Activision COO Cody Johnson stated, quote, "We have not yet seen the full core re-engage in Destiny." During that meeting, the company admitted the game had underperformed, but concerns were put to rest with the understanding that the game would pursue further monetization from microtransactions, putting shareholders at ease with the thought that they could at least still take advantage of the portion of the audience that did buy the game. But it's all too easy to paint EA and Activision as the bad guys of the gaming world, though. So let's switch gears and talk about Rockstar and Take-Two, who already had a cash cow on their hands with GTA 5. They easily recovered the money they spent on the game, a massive $250 million budget, on pre-orders alone. Before a single unit left store shelves, it was already making a profit. But since then, it has gone on to become the most profitable entertainment product of all time, making more money than any movie, book, or album in history. A big part of that is due to GTA Online. For a while, it wasn't exactly clear how much they were raking in, but thanks to a lawsuit between a former Rockstar North president and Take-Two, we have a small window into the money still pumping into this game. In the lawsuit, it was revealed that thanks to microtransactions alone, GTA Online had generated over $500 million. And that number isn't current at time of writing. That's just the 2.5 years after the game's initial release. It's sure to have made a lot more since then. Of course, the latest offering from Rockstar and Take-Two is no different in design. Red Dead Redemption 2 released to critical acclaim, and looking at worldwide sales for the year, it's currently sitting at number 4 and number 18 on the PS4 and Xbox One respectively. An impressive feat considering the game was only just released at the end of October. But when it released, it did so without an online mode. That would come a few weeks later. But thanks to the success of GTA Online, it too appears to be filled with a slow grind for in-game currency that can quite simply be skipped if you wanted to give them more real-world money. If what you could buy were simply cosmetic items, it would be one thing. But in GTA Online, you can use real-world cash to purchase jets and tanks, and in Red Dead Redemption 2, real-world cash will also buy you an in-game advantage. Take, for example, an unlockable feature like fast travel, available once you reach level 65, or unlockable immediately with 112 gold bars. Now, you could just grind it out instead of breaking out your wallet, but current estimates suggest that this will take you somewhere around 900 hours of gameplay to earn that much gold. The problem with all of this monetization is that whether or not it affects you directly, whether or not you're the ones being targeted, the ones the developers and publishers are looking to take advantage of to make a quick buck, it does affect you indirectly. It affects you with the design of the game itself. A game where it's easy to make in-game currency is one that will not be as successful financially as one where it's much harder. When the grind is too much, some people are willing to pay, but that results in a game that isn't as fun to play, and one that rewards those who invest hundreds if not thousands of hours, or those who invest hundreds if not thousands of dollars, with an in-game advantage over those that may want to play the game more casually. There are lots of great games out there. I'm looking at you, indie devs. We shouldn't be wasting our time with AAA titles that want to slow progression down in order to increase profits. At the time of editing this video, there's still no word on whether or not Red Dead 2 will have private or PvE only lobbies, something that was very enjoyable in the previous entry in the series, but one that seems less ripe for money making. Only time will tell where they land on that, but based on the profits that stand to be made, I have an idea already. When it comes to stupid money-making schemes in the world of gaming, unfortunately for the gamers, everyone's getting in on it. Bethesda, one of the last strongholds of good single-player games in the AAA space, released one of the sloppiest and laziest entries this year in Fallout 76. A Fallout game without dialogue, a Fallout game without meaningful story or player choice, a Fallout game without NPCs, and for those of you rushing to the comments section, stop. The robots don't count. Fallout 76 is what happens when little thought is put into a project with a singular goal in mind. Give customers a way to play an online open world with an in-game store for microtransactions and watch the money roll in. Except this game has been nothing but failures, one after another. The horrible reviews from both users and the critics, the nylon bag fiasco, leaking customer information through a buggy customer support system that apparently runs in the same engine as their games. Fallout 76 has been a rude awakening for Bethesda, but a great example to the gaming world as a whole that maybe open world games as a service with ongoing microtransactions aren't all they're cracked up to be. So far we've talked about various ways publishers and developers use in-game microtransactions to generate revenue, but there's one other important topic surrounding all this, and that's gambling. Specifically, are loot boxes gambling, and should they be regulated as such? There's a few common objections we need to address in order to understand the true problem we're facing here. A common defense is that it's not really gambling if you aren't getting any real-world value from it. Also, it's not gambling because you're always getting something when you open up a loot box. But those two defenses are directly in conflict with one another. You might argue one way or the other, but it can't be both. If getting something every time you play means it isn't gambling, casinos could give you a penny whenever you place the bet, and it wouldn't be gambling. You're getting something back after all. I know I'm reaching here, but it's a slippery slope. And on the other side, to say that there's no real-world value isn't always the case. CSGO and PUBG being prime examples. In the case of PUBG, their version of the loot box unlocks items that can be sold for real-world money. At one point, the in-game cosmetic miniskirt was going for hundreds of dollars. And when ranking up and getting these loot boxes can make players a profit, it only encourages cheating. A problem that dramatically and negatively affected PUBG. The more you win, the more loot boxes you can unlock. The more loot boxes you open, the more real-world money you can make off of it. CSGO, however, takes this to an entirely new level, with sites like CSGO Lotto pulling in boatloads of money by offering players a way to gamble skins online that they've earned in-game. These skins do have intrinsic value to some. In January 2018, one CSGO fan spent $61,000 on an in-game rifle skin. For some perspective on that, the median household income in the United States in 2017 was barely above $59,000. A single in-game skin valued more than the money half of American households make in the course of an entire year. Overwatch loot boxes are often held up as an example when discussing RNG loot in games today. I mean, I did probably end up using one in the thumbnail of this video. That's because they are immediately recognizable. But it is far from the worst offender. Now, please don't mistake that as me defending the practice. I'm not. I'd much rather buy the thing I want directly than taking my chance at an RNG roll. Or maybe like the good old days, we go back to just unlocking stuff in-game. But there's a reason loot boxes in Overwatch make up a much smaller percentage of the game's revenue when compared to some EA titles. They're not pay to win, as is the case with EA Ultimate Team, which started in FIFA and then spilled into every sports title the publisher makes. But the problem with Overwatch loot boxes is that because they aren't perceived as inherently evil, then they must be okay. It normalizes the idea that full-price games can have some sort of microtransactions baked into them, and it's a concerning trend. When loot boxes and RNG progression obviously break a product, the gaming community is quick to point it out, and nowhere was that better demonstrated than with the release of Star Wars Battlefront 2 last fall. The progression was entirely tied to RNG loot boxes, and buying them could give you distinct advantages in multiplayer. The system was so obviously broken, and due to fans' outrage, just days before the official launch, EA and DICE were forced to remove the ability to buy in-game premium currency altogether until they could rework player progression, something that didn't occur for months, laying bare how much of the game's design was built around it. It was in its very DNA. This became a major turning point in the battle against loot boxes. This was one of the sloppiest attempts at a pay-to-win money grab implemented on top of one of the world's most recognizable intellectual properties. Everyone saw it for what it was, and it caused so much uproar that Disney threatened to withdraw licensing rights to Star Wars games from EA, and it caused politicians to respond with threats of regulations aimed at games targeting gambling mechanics towards children. A handful of countries have set their sights on these exploitative business practices, specifically Belgium, the Netherlands, Australia, the UK, and now the US. In each case, at least some link to gambling has been determined, and regulatory committees are already determining what to do next. EA themselves stand to lose the most, as they have built the bulk of their business on this model, and it is not without irony that thanks to their own actions surrounding the release of Battlefront 2, that they brought this to the forefront of the public's perception. As far as I can tell, State Representative Chris Lee from Hawaii was the first to set proposed legislation in motion here in the US. I have to wonder if his Admiral Akbar quote was known to him, or something an aide slipped into his speech. Either way, it was a great twist that a quote from Star Wars would be used to explain just how dirty the business practices were in the latest Battlefront game.
This game is a Star Wars themed online casino designed to lure kids into spending money. It's a trap.
If it wasn't obvious enough already that EA has built their very existence on in-game gambling, the fact that they are willing to go to court to fight governments for the right to keep these mechanics in their games which are marketed to children, should be enough to hammer that home. And let's talk about the kids for a minute. A recent study in the UK found that underage gambling has quadrupled in just the last 2 years. The study finds close to 500,000 kids in the UK, ages 11 to 16, bet regularly. This is more than the number that have taken drugs, smoked cigarettes, or drunk alcohol, all things regulated by the government. The study also directly linked exposure to loot boxes in games with potential problem gambling in kids. On the other side of the world, the Australian Gambling Commission in turn also declared loot boxes are a way of exploiting gambling disorders. Loot boxes and recognized forms of gambling employ the same tactics to entice their audience. They both trick players into thinking a payoff is coming if they just keep spending. The only difference is that technology moves faster than regulations, and so far they've been able to stay ahead of the system in most countries, but not the Netherlands and Belgium, where they both now classify loot boxes as gambling. They must be removed from games, otherwise it's breaking the law. And EA is currently under criminal investigation as a result, not because they unknowingly broke the law, but because they insist on including gambling mechanics in their games in spite of the law. Loot boxes are not here to stay. Even if you think it's okay, it doesn't make it right. Even considering the just don't buy them excuse, some people will buy them. Some people will fall into the trap. Some people are the prey. Please don't defend these greedy practices on behalf of corporations. And for everyone else, everyone that doesn't buy the loot boxes, please don't forget that the game's design can be terribly flawed as a result, Shadow of War and Battlefront 2 both being great recent examples. When a game is designed to bring in money, it's not designed to be fun. It's designed to make you consider paying more to make it fun. AAA publishers often defend the inclusion of tactics such as loot boxes with the idea that if players didn't buy them, they wouldn't include them. We already know how much money they make from in-game purchases, sometimes many times over what they make from selling actual games. What we don't know is how much they make from in-game purchases off of the whales, a term defining the very small percentage of players responsible for the large percentages of these purchases. You can't assume that loot boxes are popular if we can't determine how many people are actually buying them. All we know is that there's a ton of money in it for the publishers to include them, and as long as that's the case, as long as we let them get away with it, there's nothing incentivizing them to stop. I remember the good old days when you'd buy a game and it was a complete package. No day one patch, no DLC, no season passes or special editions, no in-game stores with specialized currency, and no RNG-based loot boxes. These were the good old days of gaming, and even considering all the technological advances over the years, it's sometimes hard to grasp just how lucky we were. If you enjoyed the video, Likes, comments, and shares really help the channel and are greatly appreciated. If you're new here, subscribe for more great gaming videos, and while you're at it, consider hitting the bell to get notifications, as it's very easy for a small channel like mine to get lost in the shuffle. But until the next one, this is Move the Mouse, signing off.